I've always been fascinated by places that time seems to have forgotten. Driving through Missouri, I found myself drawn to towns that once buzzed with life but now stand in silence, holding on to memories only the walls remember. Walking down cracked streets and empty schools, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trespassing into history itself. Each abandoned place carries a story, of families, of dreams, of sudden endings. Today, I want to take you with me as we step inside Missouri's forgotten ghost towns, where silence speaks louder than words. If you enjoyed exploring these forgotten places with me, make sure to subscribe so we can uncover even more hidden stories together. 1. Arlington, Missouri. I still remember the first time I drove off the highway and followed the narrow road that led into Arlington, Missouri. The map showed it as just a small almost forgotten, but something about the name pulled me in. The town looked frozen, as if life had quietly stepped out and never returned. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the calm silence you hear in the countryside, but the kind that makes you feel like you've entered a place where time doesn't exist anymore. The old building stood there, tired and worn out, with broken windows and faded paint peeling from the walls. I could almost picture families who once sat on those front porches, children running down the dusty streets, and the laughter that used to fill the air. Now, all of that was gone. Walking deeper into the town, I found what looked like an old gas station. Its rusty sign still swayed lightly with the wind. I stood there for a while, imagining travelers from the old Route 66 days, stopping here for fuel and maybe a quick meal. Arlington once thrived because of that famous road, but when the highway was rerouted, it was like the heartbeat of the town was ripped away. Slowly, businesses shut down, families moved, and the town faded into nothing but memories. I wandered through what used to be the main street. My footsteps echoed against the cracked pavement. It felt like the whole place was watching me, holding its breath. There was an odd beauty in its emptiness, as if every abandoned home still carried the whispers of the people who once lived there. At one point, I stopped near an old bridge by the river. The water moved gently below, but the wooden planks of the bridge looked too weak to trust. Standing there, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the sounds of life that once surrounded this town, the chatter from the schoolhouse, the music from a local bar, the rumble of cars passing through on Route 66. For a moment, it almost felt alive again. But when I opened my eyes, it was just me, the crumbling remains of Arlington, and the quiet wind that swept through the hollow streets. I felt a strange sadness, like I had just visited a friend who no longer recognized me. Yet at the same time, I felt grateful. Grateful that places like Arlington still exist, reminders of how quickly life can change, how towns that once thrived can vanish into history, and how silence sometimes tells the loudest story of all. As I drove away, I kept looking back in the mirror. Arlington didn't feel like just an abandoned town. It felt like a memory, still standing, waiting for someone to notice. And for a brief moment, I was part of its story. 2 Times Beach, Missouri. The road to Times Beach felt ordinary at first. Trees on both sides, the faint sound of birds, and the calm Missouri sky above me. But as I entered the old town limits, something shifted. It wasn't just another abandoned place. It felt like a whole life was stolen from here, leaving only ghosts of memories behind. I pulled over near the old entrance where a weathered sign once welcomed travelers. Now it stood faded, barely readable, almost like it was ashamed of what had happened here. Walking down the empty path, I could see the outlines of streets, cracked and swallowed by weeds. It was hard to imagine that families once lived here, that children used to ride their bikes across these same roads. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't peaceful. It carried a weight, like the land itself still remembered the disaster that took everything away. Back in the early 1980s, the soil here was poisoned with dioxin. People didn't know at first. They lived their lives, went to school, held Sunday picnics by the river, completely unaware of the invisible danger beneath their feet. By the time the truth came out, it was too late. Homes had to be abandoned, lives uprooted, and the entire community was forced to leave. Standing there, I could almost hear echoes of conversations, neighbors greeting each other, children laughing in backyards, dogs barking in the distance. Now, all that was left was overgrown grass and a haunting emptiness. I walked toward the river, where the town used to gather for festivals. The water moved quietly, but it felt different, as if it knew the story of what happened here. I tried to picture what it must have been like for the families when they were told they couldn't come back. Imagine being forced to leave your home, not because of war or flood, but because the very ground beneath you had turned toxic. As I stood there, the air carried a strange stillness. I felt sadness more than fear. It wasn't the kind of place that scared you with shadows or strange noises. It scared you with truth, with the reminder that life can change in an instant, and that even something as solid as your hometown can be erased from existence. Today, Times Beach has been turned into Route 66, State Park, but walking through it, you don't see a park. You see what was lost. The laughter that never returned, the homes that were left behind, the memories buried under poison soil. When I finally walked back to my car, I felt as though I had stepped out of a story too heavy to carry. Times Beach wasn't just abandoned, it was betrayed by the land itself. And in that silence, I realized some ghosts don't take human form. Some are entire towns. Free Red Oak 2, near Carthage, Missouri. Driving through the quiet backroads near Carthage, Missouri, I wasn't sure what to expect when I first heard about Red Oak 2. People had called it a ghost town, but when I arrived, I realized it was something different, not dead, not alive, but caught somewhere in between. The first thing that struck me was how carefully everything was placed. Old houses, a church, a schoolhouse, even a tiny gas station, it felt like I had stepped back into the 1930s. But the strange part was, none of it belonged here originally. Every building had been moved from somewhere else, carried piece by piece, and rebuilt by an artist named Lowell Davis. He had grown up in the original Red Oak, a small town that slowly disappeared, and when he saw it fading away, he decided to bring it back to life in his own way. Walking down the gravel path, I felt as though I was inside someone's memory. The blacksmith shop stood quietly, its tools still in place. A little chapel with its white steeple looked ready for a Sunday service, even though no congregation would arrive. Each house had its own story, frozen in time, yet alive through the care that rebuilt it. What made Red Oak 2 so different from other ghost towns was the feeling. Most abandoned places carry sadness, but here, there was a sense of love, almost like the town itself had been saved from being forgotten. Still, as I stood there, I couldn't shake the thought that the laughter and voices were missing. Everything looked perfect, but the silence reminded me that this wasn't truly a living town, it was more like a painting you could walk through. I wandered into a small diner that looked like it had just closed for the night. Chairs were neatly tucked under the tables, an old jukebox stood in the corner, and a faded Coca-Cola sign hung by the door. I ran my hand across the counter, half expecting to feel the warmth of a cup of coffee left behind. Instead, it was cold, untouched for years. The strangest thing was, I didn't feel alone. Even without people, Red Oak 2 carried the presence of the lives it represented. It was as if Lowell Davis had poured not just wood and nails into this place, but also his own memories, his childhood, and his longing for the past. When I left, I looked back one more time. The sun was setting behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the ground. For a moment, I could almost hear the faint sounds of children playing, a bell ringing from the schoolhouse, and the low hum of life in a small Missouri town. Red Oak 2 isn't just an abandoned place. It's a reminder that even when a town dies, its spirit can live on, if someone loves it enough to bring it back. For Riverview, Missouri. I still remember the uneasy feeling I had when I first stepped into what was once Riverview, Missouri. The road narrowed as I got closer, and the trees seemed to lean in from both sides, like they were trying to hide the place. By the time I parked my car and walked into the old settlement, it felt as if I had crossed into another time, one that had ended long before I got there. The town sat along the riverbank, and the sound of the water was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't loud or violent, just steady, almost like the river was breathing. Yet, I couldn't shake the thought that this same river had played a part in the town's downfall. Floods had washed through here more than once, wearing away not just the land but also the spirit of the people who called it home. The remains of Riverview were scattered. A few broken houses leaned into the earth, their roofs collapsed and their windows shattered like tired eyes. I walked past what must have been the town's main street. The pavement was cracked, weeds pushing through, and silence wrapped itself around me like a heavy blanket. I stopped near one house that still stood better than the rest. Its porch sagged, but the front door was hanging open, almost inviting me in. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old wood. In the corner, I saw a rusted bed frame and scraps of wallpaper still clinging to the wall. I imagined a family once sitting here, maybe a mother calling her children in for supper, maybe a father coming home tired from the river. Now, the only voices were in my head, echoes of a life that no longer existed. Outside, the river kept moving. It was strange, the town was dead, but the river never stopped. It kept flowing, as if mocking the stillness it had left behind. I sat on a fallen beam and just listened for a while. There was something haunting about the way nature had taken over. Birds nested in broken chimneys, vines crawled across doors, and the ground had swallowed up the sidewalks. Standing there, I realized Riverview wasn't abandoned in the same way as other ghost towns. It wasn't just about people leaving, it was about a place slowly being erased, pulled back into the earth by time and water. It wasn't fear I felt, but sadness, a quiet grief for a town that had lost its fight. When I finally walked back to my car, I looked over my shoulder one last time. The houses stood in silence, the river whispering beside them. Riverview was gone, yet in that moment, it felt alive again, because I was there to remember it. 5 Arlington School ruins and ghost town near Newburgh, Missouri. The first time I found myself standing in front of the Arlington School ruins, it was late afternoon. The sun was dipping low, throwing long shadows across the broken walls. From a distance, the structure looked like a skeleton of its former self, bricks crumbling, windows shattered, and the roof mostly gone. But the closer I walked, the heavier the air felt, as if the building still carried the weight of all the children who once filled it with life. I stepped inside carefully, crunching over broken glass and fallen plaster. The hallways were empty, but I could almost hear the echoes of footsteps, the shuffling of books, and the chatter of students who used to run down these same corridors. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick, like the past refused to let go. One classroom still had a few desks left, rusted and falling apart, but placed in a way that made it easy to imagine what the room once looked like. I touched one desk, my fingers brushing across the rough surface, and for a moment, I could almost see a child sitting there, scribbling notes or passing a folded paper to a friend. The blackboard was cracked, but faint chalk lines still lingered, half erased, barely visible. It felt like the last lesson had never ended, just suspended in time. I closed my eyes and tried to picture a teacher standing there, calling the room to order, while sunlight streamed in through windows that are now nothing more than empty holes. Walking further, I noticed graffiti covering some of the walls. Names, dates, drawings, signs that others had come here long after the school was abandoned. Yet beneath those layers, the spirit of the place was untouched. There was something deeply human about the ruins, like they still carried the hopes and dreams of the children who once studied here. Outside, the ghost town of Arlington spread quietly around the ruins. A few broken homes stood nearby, sagging under years of neglect. The wind moved through them, carrying with it the faint creak of wood and the smell of damp earth. Standing there, I realized that the school wasn't just another abandoned building. It was the heart of a community that no longer exists. As the sky grew darker, I stood on the steps of the school and looked back one last time. The place felt alive in its own strange way, holding on to memories that refused to fade. I felt both sadness and gratitude, sadness for what was lost, and gratitude that I was there to witness it. Driving away, the image of that broken classroom stayed with me. The ruins didn't just tell the story of a school. They told the story of a town that once believed in tomorrow, and how even in silence, those whispers of the past still remain.